Perfect. Okay, so thank you everybody again for joining this third webinar of our IHS Co-Creating Water Knowledge Working Group. So today we are very happy to have Dr. Deborah Ayodele-Olajire from University of Ibadan in Nigeria with us today, and she's going to be giving us a talk about co-creation in water governance, climate change agency and power considerations. So thank you very much Deborah, for joining us today and to sharing your research with the group. So I'll give you a little bit of background about Deborah. So she's a lecturer in the Department of Geography at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria. She is a sustainability and development scholar with expertise in the interconnected impact areas of climate change, including water governance, energy, food security, waste management, and public health. She got her PhD and MA degrees from Arizona State University in the USA and her bachelor from the University of Lagos. And her research focuses on environmental governance across these themes. She also has a lot of field experience spanning the United States and Nigeria, and she pursues collaborations with local communities, policymakers, businesses, multilateral organizations to co-create solutions and support evidence-based policymaking. She's published her research in different international journals. She's the guest editor of the Ecology and Society in the USA Journal and has received many different awards and grants from a diverse range of organizations. So we're really happy to have you, Deborah, here with us today, and yeah, looking forward to your presentation. So, oh, I just realized Natalie is here and I didn't introduce our different working group leads. So Natalie Capperley is here, so she's just giving us a wave there. She is one of the working group leads, and I've put the link to the working group in the chat. And this webinar series is hosted by myself. So I'm based in Ireland at University College Cork, and Ayodele Olusa, who is based in the University of York in Canada. So really happy to be organising this webinar series with you all. So Deborah, I'm going to hand over to you if you're able to manage the sharing of your slides directly, and if not, then we might default to myself and I can share them for you. Great. Deborah, just double checking, can you hear us okay? Whoops. We seem to have lost Deborah. Deborah, could you let us know if you're there? Deborah did have some technical issues just before we joined, but she had managed to join on her phone and her laptop, but perhaps her internet now has been lost. Adame, just to double check, you haven't had any contact with Deborah?
Yes, I'm reaching out to her now.
Okay.
Just trying to double check what's happening. Yeah, she should be up any moment. Sorry about that.
Oh, I see a new Deborah is joining.
Oh, okay.
New Deborah. And in the meantime, if others want to introduce yourselves in the chat, that would be really nice. It's really interesting to hear about where you're from and your research and your background. So please do share in the chat if you also wanted to share your LinkedIn or anything like that, just to make sure we can all stay connected. Great. Hi, Deborah. Hi, Deborah. Can you hear us? We can see you now.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
Okay,
I can
great.
hear you.
We have
So,
you. Perfect.
I just sent my slides. I think it seems there's an issue sharing right now. So maybe you share from your end, and then I'll
Okay.
just
I
begin the
haven't
presentation.
received them yet. Adame, have you received the slides?
Yes, I'm trying to send it to you. Just a minute. Okay. Yep. I've sent it to you. Oh, okay.
Maybe Deborah, just in the meantime, before I get the slides up, maybe you could already start to speak to the first slide. I've already given an introduction to you, just in case you didn't catch that. But maybe you could already just give an introduction to your talk. Okay.
Hi everyone, it's nice to be here. My name is Deborah Ayodele-OlajireUniversity. I am a lecturer at the University of Ibadan in Nigeria, the Department of Geography. My presentation this morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world, is on co-creation in water governance, the role of climate change, agency, and power considerations. I am going to turn off my camera here to sort of help with the bandwidth. And so this research I'm presenting is a part of what I did at Arizona State University. And so that's why I have that credit on my presentation. So I'm going to be talking about a study that was carried out in Arizona regarding water governance across levels and within levels. I'm trying to wait a little bit for the slide to be up.
I'm just about to pop them up now, so
okay.
1 second.
Okay.
Oh, I think, Adame, I'm not able to share. Sharing is not turned on. Apologies, everyone. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Can you see now in full screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So
Thank
take it
you so
away.
much. All right. So the objective of the presentation basically is to, within this research, interrogate considerations for co-creation in water governance. That is, what things are important to note. I think I'll be talking a little bit about how I define co-creation and all of that as I go through the presentation. But I just wanted to, at the beginning, sort of show you what the research questions are that are interrogated here. So there were 2 questions. And the first is about how power can be exercised by different governance actors across the levels of governance and then within the level of governance. And the end goal is for sustainable water governance, which is important, especially against the backdrop of climate change. And then the other question that I'll sort of be going through in the presentation is about the role of evidence in promoting co-creation. Next slide, please. Okay, so before I get into this background, let me just say quickly that power considerations can be looked at both the vertical scale and the horizontal scale. I think that was in the last slide. But going into the literature background, so basically I defined co-creation following McGlade and others who have said that it consists of the research process that looks into co-designing with other stakeholders, co-producing knowledge with them, and then co-delivering whatever outcomes with the stakeholders. And when it comes to successful co-creation, a number of authors have talked about, what it takes to actually have a successful process. And Greenhall and others have, sort of itemized 3 things for them which would dictate the success of the process. They said having a systems perspective, being able to look at the whole picture of all the stakeholders involved, a creative approach. So it might not be, the way we do research. One might need to be creative in the participatory process in order to get feedback from stakeholders. And then the third is paying attention to governance, which sort of takes us back to my emphasis on governance in this particular presentation. Also, there have been insights from other sectors, you could say. Co-creation has been practiced in business. It's been practiced in the public health sector. And I found three recommendations very useful that were given by Midel. Midel and others are from the public health sector, but I think these insights that they provide could actually be very helpful within the water and hydrological sector as well. And so, according to Midel and others, they say that the selection of collaborators and their power dynamics are important within the co-creation process. They also say that the capacities needed to successfully apply this approach, such as emotional intelligence, adaptability, needs to be paid attention to. And then finally, other practical matters, ethical approval, availability of resources are important. Next slide, please. So what does the research, tell us so far with respect to water governance, especially in the study area? There have been studies regarding water governance in Arizona. There are studies on exempt wells. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these things when I'm describing the study area. But basically, Arizona is, you can say, a water-stressed region because climatically, the state is located in the arid portion. And so southwestern US is dry climatically. And so previous research have shown that what we call exempt wells, exempt well households are more vulnerable to water scarcity. Exempt wells are wells that are not regulated. Other studies have shown that non-government actors who are also part of the governance framework employ different skills in supporting their claims when it comes to practicing water governance. Other studies have shown that there are value differences, and this is very important to my presentation today. There are value differences between members of a particular partnership within the region. And finally, the governance designation in the area, which is called AMA, Active Management Area, gives the study area I'll be talking about more legitimacy over others. And so the reason why this study is important and why I spent time on this is, if you noticed, one of the elements of co-creation is power. And so if we are going to be bringing stakeholders together, there is a need to understand the power dynamics and be sensitive to whatever values are driving those dynamics. And so that is why this study was conducted. Next slide, please. So this is my conceptual framework, thinking of the co-creation process, bringing it into water governance. There is a co-design that's designing with stakeholders. In the water sector, when we talk of water governance, that relates to both government actors. So maybe the mayor, in Nigeria, we call them local government chairman, government actors. It has to do with the non-government actors. So these would be maybe NGOs, water groups, community groups around water. So co-designing with all of these stakeholders. The other portion of the framework is the co-production of knowledge. Before co-creation became, what we can call a big deal, like it is now, I think we are used to co-production, I mean researchers, because for qualitative research, for example, you go into the community, you talk to them. So the knowledge does not just come from you, it comes also from the community. But co-production goes a step further, with these iterative back and forth interaction you have with the community in refining the findings, which is what we didn't have outside of the participatory methods that we employed in the past. And then the third portion of the framework is the co-implementation. So in the past, researchers would come up with recommendations based on their own reasoning and reading of the literature, while co-implementation here is working with communities to actually come up with these recommendations. Next slide, please. And so this is the study area. So I'd like to spend just a little time explaining this a little bit to give context to the study. So like I mentioned earlier, Arizona is located in the southwestern part of the US. It is dry. And in this map of Arizona, which is on the right, you would see the division into counties. The shaded county are the ones in the southern parts, and those are like the urban areas, if you will. Northern Arizona is maybe you can say semi-rural or peri-urban. Now, the watershed that is framing this study is highlighted in the short dashes, and within that watershed is where we call the Prescott Active Management Area. Prescott Active Management Area is one of 5 AMAs that were created by Arizona's Groundwater Management Act of 1980. And Prescott AMA has 4 main communities, which are where I went to for the field work for this research. Next slide, please. So because this was a study that was looking at generating evidence for the co-creation process, I made use of data triangulation. So there were semi-structured interviews, document analysis, the use of archival data, and then field observation. So I did coding with MaxQDA using an inductive method. And I just have here a sample of one of the transcripts and the coding process. Next slide, please. So what did I find? How does governance happen across levels? The levels I looked at were the local, the regional, and the state level. And what I found was that the Groundwater Management Act, which I said created the AMAs, was sort of the central rallying point for any interactions that was happening across the levels. So starting with the state and regional level, at the state, between the state and regional levels, there were interactions around what we call the management plans. The Groundwater Management Act of 1918 had like 10-year management plans, which were basically like guidelines on what was to be accomplished regarding water resources in the state. And so whenever state actors, so for example, that would be the director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources, were interacting with government actors or even governance actors in the county, Yavapai County, they were usually talking about the GMA, that's the Groundwater Management Act. That was basically the focus. So their interactions were around the management plans. They were around technical resource. We need somebody from the department to come and look at if there's an issue with exempt wells or things like that. The other focus was on funding. Management plans had stipulations for how much groundwater could be pumped. There were sort of like ranges. And so the communities or the region, that's Yavapai County, would be asking for funding basically to be able to carry that out. And then the fourth way they were interacting was meetings around the Management Act specifically. Between the regional governance actors and the local governance actors, the interactions were mainly about growth debates. And growth debates had to do with the southern part of Arizona as urbanized. A few people are moving into the northern communities. Yes, we also want to develop or grow like the southern communities, but these restrictions on water are making that difficult. And so that's, a lot of the interactions between the regional and local governance actors. Now, between the state, which will be at the top, you could say, and the local actors, which might say at the bottom of the ladder, sort of. A lot of their interactions were around permitting. We want permits for wells or reporting, because the Management Act stipulated that certain reports needed to be produced at the end of each management period. So interactions are basically focused on those two things. Next slide, please. And so what we found with the vertical governance was that, number one, the interactions across the levels were informational. So it was about maybe getting and receiving information, and the information would usually have to do with water conservation or water augmentation. Also, there were contentious interactions limiting cooperation, and those contentions were mainly around growth. The local actors mainly wanted, they had a different vision from what the state level actors did. And then another finding from that vertical governance was that these informational and contentious interactions were basically, to a large extent, encouraged by the stipulations of the Groundwater Management Act. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, looking at interactions at the local level, so we can call this a within level interaction, between the four communities, the interactions were around two things. Number one, there was a Big Chino Ranch project. Now, this Big Chino Ranch project is a project that was to bring water into the AME. But then there were also conflicts around the fact that the four communities were sharing the same groundwater resource. And those conflicts had to do with within basin water transfer. It had to do with the expectations of groundwater recharge. And then it had to do with the local area growing on what we call exempt wells. So to explain this, maybe a little differently, within the AME, there are limitations on how much groundwater is available. And so one of the options that the governance actors came up with was being able to import water from outside the AME, and that's this Big Chino Ranch project. Next slide, please. And so looking at these within level interaction, what we found was that there was cooperation on water augmentation. If we are bringing in water, then the governance actors were in agreement because it was a shared economic growth interest. And then we also found that hydrologic connection, the fact that they were all within the same basin, was not sufficient in promoting coordination among the actors. Number three, we found that economic growth, the ability to control their own water, and then rural preferences were bigger than any concerns about water scarcity. The truth was that all of the time when the study was being conducted, even though the state was in a multi-year drought, and I think the drought is back now, you wouldn't really see that. And so people didn't really have a grasp of the effect of climate change on their water resources. And then the fourth finding regarding horizontal governance was that the tension between staying rural and then becoming urban was inhibiting sustainable water governance cooperation. Next slide, please. So how was power, exercised, or how is power being exercised at the local and then across levels? We found 3 ways. Number 1, through litigation. Number 2, through legislation. And then number 3, within political processes. Now, through litigation, when there are disagreements, rather than have a deliberative meeting to talk through the differences, the governance actors, depending on where they are on the scale, whether state, regional, or local, would prefer to go to courts. So that was how they exercised power through litigation. Through legislation, it was mainly the state level actors that were able to utilize legislation. And so basically, in order to, in quotes, maybe enforce a certain trajectory, it's brought into legislation. And then finally, within political processes, within you can say, parties that are voted, both at the local and the state level, water governance actors were exercising their power over water governance. Next slide, please. So summarizing the findings on how power is being exercised within the water governance process, we found that actors would prioritize litigation, take the other party to court over deliberation. We also found that financial resources and legal advantage was promoting that choice of litigation over deliberation, because financial resources, I would say, were available, and the legal resources as well. That became sort of the first option that governance actors were taking. A third finding regarding power was that resource availability. So resources can either be mental ideas, resources can be monetary, money, funding, resources can be artifactual, or they can be natural, which is the water itself. So the availability of resources was determining whether power was exercised through any of those routes. So whenever the financial resources are available to the local people, they would rather go litigation. For the state government actors, because they were at the state level, they had that mental resource, they would go through legislation. And then the political process was sort of what was left, where people juggled to put in the party that would favor whatever objectives they had, whether growth or remaining rural. And then finally, we found that the dominant non-sustainability focused water narrative, which was really at the state level, was what was guiding water governance in the region. Next slide, please. And so, pulling these interactions together, what we found was that exempt well proliferation, which is the increase in wells that were not regulated, was a preference for the water governance actors with rural preferences. We also found that the 3 main ways in which power was being exercised were litigation, legislation, and the political process. We also saw that the interest-based water narratives were main drivers of coordination. So people who had the growth idea, would they worked together. Basically, governance actors would identify themselves based on their interest. If we are for growth, then we discuss together, we work together. If we are for libertarian views or keeping the region rural, we discuss together. And then finally, whether intentionally or not, the Groundwater Management Act that was supposed to promote water sustainability was actually being legitimately used to not promote water sustainability. Next slide, please. And so the reason why I have gone, sort of through a bit of the process and what we found vertically, horizontally, and regarding power is just to show that this evidence, which is what the study sought to look for, is necessary before co-creation even starts. Because now understanding the biases amongst the stakeholders is what would help in the co-designing process. But with, I mean, in a situation like this, you will still want a very diverse stakeholder group. So having the evidence helps in selecting stakeholders, understanding how power is being employed within the water governance system also helps in ensuring that the co-design stage does not end in conflicts, and maybe some middle ground can be achieved. The other conclusion sort of that comes from this study is that successful co-creation, especially in water-stressed regions, which are being exacerbated by climate change, should be sensitive to the roles of climate change. So when we say being sensitive to the roles of climate change, the researchers might know, but it also takes the stakeholders having that understanding to sort of have their maybe cooperation, if you will, within the process. Agency is also important. Individuals have their preferences, which come from deep-seated values. So being sensitive to this understanding of agency is important before the co-creation process even begins. And finally, understanding how power is being exercised or wielded among the stakeholders is important if we are to ensure truly participatory processes that are successful in co-creation. So I think I'm going to stop here, and we could have a discussion. Thank you so much for your attention.
Great, thank you so much, Deborah. That was super interesting. Really nice to get your practical insights on power and co-creation. So really happy to open the floor for questions. We have a little bit of time, and yeah, is there anybody that would like to already ask a question? Not yet? Okay, I might ask you one then, Deborah. So it's overall really interesting study, and I'm interested in kind of understanding maybe more where this is situated in the wider kind of policy and implementation governance. So is there any collaborations with the government in terms of taking on some of these findings, or what are the next steps in terms of the co-creation process that could follow?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think it's a great one. So one of the, you can say, downsides of the criticisms of the Groundwater Management Act was that it was, let's say, in its drafting, was not as participatory and maybe all-encompassing as it should have been. And so the Groundwater Management Act has sort of a deadline of 2025, that's this year. And so findings of this research could actually help with that next stage of, so what next? If the stipulations of the act are ending now, how do we proceed in actually ensuring that our water is sustainable into the future? And so I think this understanding of how power is working, within the community and then across levels should help. Also, it means that where the Groundwater Management Act was being criticized for not being co-creative, this is an opportunity for that to happen. So now there can be a design that is co-designed, there can be the co-production, and then co-implementation, you can say, becomes easier because everybody has been involved from the beginning of the process.
Thanks, Deborah. And do those partnerships kind of exist between the government, between the different agencies and the university? Like, is there anything there to kind of, I don't know, facilitate that partnership kind of long term?
Okay, so I think there's been an argument for boundary organizations,
Yeah.
organizations that can sort of stand in the middle. So there is a decision center for Desert City at Arizona State University, DCDC. And I think they try to do a bit of that, being a boundary organization that would link maybe government actors and then the academia, so that when there are studies on how things can work, there's a way it can be communicated and received by the government actors. I think there is still an opportunity to bring in non-government actors who are actually very important in the governance process, because academics can do their thing, the government can come up with stipulations and all, but if you don't have the buy-in of the people, get their ideas and all, that might not work. So I think that is still an opportunity that can grow beyond what it is currently.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Deborah. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah.
No? Okay. Is there anything you'd like to share or reflect on, Deborah, or anything anybody would like to ask about the working group or anything like that?
Well, I could share a little bit. So I wanted to stay within time, and I know I probably didn't go to a lot of details about the area, but I think one thing that comes to mind is this: when we talk about options that we have for water management, I think a lot of times, so one of the problem within the study area is that there is maybe too much focus on supply augmentation, bringing in more water resources. And so even when water managers are saying, oh, it doesn't have to be supply augmentation, we can do demand management, reuse water, make use of gray water, reduce or make use of landscaping that does not use as much drought resistant landscaping, basically, those are not being, should I say, accepted so much by the communities. So that might also be another opportunity, as we co-create, as we co-design, working with communities to come to the understanding that water augmentation is not always, the only or best option, but demand management can solve a lot of the water crisis, especially for water-stressed areas. So in the southwestern US, there is the general goal to bring in water from the Colorado River into Arizona. So that is supply augmentation at the state level. And then in these local community, there's the idea to bring in water from a neighboring basin, still supply augmentation. So I just think that we researchers can do a lot in helping the communities understand the role of demand management.
Great, thanks so much, Deborah. Anybody want to reflect on that, or any other questions from anyone in the group? No? Okay. Well, it looks like we might get out a little bit earlier then, so that's okay. I'm sure plenty of people have lots of other meetings. And thank you so much, Deborah, for your time. That was a really interesting presentation. We have been recording, and we will make sure that that's available online. So I'm going to pop in the YouTube link. So we will make sure that that's available there. So thank you very much for that. And Natalie, did you have your hand popping up there? Anything you wanted to add?
I just wanted to say thank you, Lydia. It was thank you, Deborah. It was really great to hear about your experiences, and sorry we're all so quiet today. And thank you, Lydia and Adeyemi, for all your work. And if anyone has any questions about the working group, I think most people on the list look like they know about it, but if anyone does, feel free to ask them as well.
Great, thanks so much, Natalie.
Thank you.
And yeah, we'll be in touch and advertise the next one in due course as well. And yeah, do let us know if you know of anybody, or if you yourself would like to give a presentation. So we're aiming to do them every 1 to 2 months. So yeah, please do get in touch if you have any suggestions, and we'll share around the recording soon. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Lydia, maybe you should say we now have a YouTube channel, right? So
Yes, exactly. So I've just put that in the chat.
okay, great.
Yeah, brilliant.
Great. Oh yes, you did. Okay, super. Sorry.
Great. Okay, thanks everyone, and thanks again, Deborah, for your really interesting presentation, and thanks Adame for co-organizing with me and
you.
actually working group. Have a nice
Thank you
day.
for
Rest of
having
the
me.
day, everyone. Thanks, Deborah.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.